Good evening. My name is Justin Boris, and I am pleased to serve as ADL Regional Board member and co-chair of tonight's program. It is my privilege to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. Hana Berger Moran. Hana's mother, Priska, arrived at Auschwitz as a young, expectant mother. Wrenched from her husband, she stood in front of the angel of death, Dr. Mengele, and when asked if she was pregnant, she lied. Miraculously, Hana was born 7 months later. As you will hear, Hana's survival was due in part to the courageous actions of members of General Patton's 11th Armored Division, who liberated Mauthausen concentration camp, where her mother and daughter ended up their journey following a grueling death march. After surviving the war, Hana and Priska returned to Czechoslovakia, where Hana grew up. In 1968, after the communists reasserted their power after the failed Prague Spring, Hana, who was at the time pregnant with her son, fled to Israel along with her former husband. After earning a PhD in chemistry from Weizmann Institute, Hana and her son Tommy came to the United States. A career in pharmacology followed, and Hana now lives in California. The story of Hana and her mother Priska, along with 2 other mother-infant survivor pairs, is the subject of the best-selling book, Born Survivors, by Wendy Halden. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Hana Berger Moran, from whom we will hear immediately following this special video message from Born Survivors author Wendy Halden. Please direct your attention to the screens.
Hello Denver, and greetings from my home in Suffolk, England. My name is Wendy Halden, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about my book Born Survivors in the coming hour. First of all though, may I congratulate you very warmly on your latest Governor's annual Holocaust Remembrance programme. It's events such as yours that keep the memories alive and relevant in these troubled times. Please believe me when I tell you that I'm very sorry I can't be with you today. The only reason is that I have unavoidable commitments this side of the pond. I definitely hope to visit Colorado one day. I've never been, and I hear wonderful things about it, and especially how friendly the people are. I've recorded this to let you know a little bit more about this book and about the 3 remarkable women I wrote about in it. Born Survivors is without doubt the most important book I will ever write, and I've written more than 30 books, many of them historical biographies of remarkable women during the war. These 3 terrified young mothers that I speak about hid their pregnancies from the Nazis and gave birth in unspeakable conditions in the concentration camp and slave labour camp system. Incredibly, all 3 mothers and all 3 babies survived, in great part due to luck, but also to the courage and to the kindness of strangers. Born Survivors has now been published in 22 countries and translated in 16 languages, and as I've travelled the world speaking about it in the last 2 years, I've been overwhelmed by the responses of people who've been enormously touched by the stories. It's changed people's lives in lots of ways because they feel so humbled by these women, and also they are incredibly moved to be able to meet one or all of the babies, which is an enormous privilege, as I'm sure you're aware. It is with great delight then that I'm able to introduce you to the eldest of my 3 babies, Dr. Hana Berger Moran. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman who has become extremely dear to me in the last 2 years, and as the eldest, she was the one who instigated my unofficial naming as an honorary sister to the 3 babies, and it's the greatest honour of my life. I am really apologetic to Hana because, thanks to me, everybody now knows that she will be 72 this year. And I'm very sorry about that, Hana, to tell everybody, because apart from anything else, you'd never believe it to look at her. I don't tell people this to embarrass her, but to remind them that it is within living memory that Hitler was intent on her death and the death of so many millions of others. Once you hear that she weighed under 3 pounds at birth, and her mother and the other mothers all weighed under 70 pounds, at full term, you'll find it hard to believe that any of them survived. By virtue of the dates of their births in April 1945, over a period of 2.5 weeks, these 3 babies are now destined to become the last living survivors of the Holocaust. In 5 or 10 years' time, there'll be nobody left but them. And I think they are an incredible testament to the tenacity of the human spirit and the resilience of it. I call them the voices of the voiceless, and they are so lovely and life-enhancing and positive and forgiving that it really is a wonderful legacy that their mothers left behind. So once again, my apologies for not being with you today, but I promise you won't be disappointed when you hear what Hana has to tell you. She's an amazing, amazing woman, and I love her dearly. So please give a big Denver welcome to Dr. Hana Berger Moran. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much for being here. It makes me feel very proud, and I hope not to let you down in telling you the story of my mother, primarily since all I did was quiet. My mother grew up in a very modest home. The family had a kosher cafe in a small town in Czechoslovakia. She was the only child of the 5 that went to school because the schooling was extremely important to her studying. She was very ambitious. She wanted to speak many languages, namely because she wanted to understand what her parents were talking to each other in German after the children already went to bed. But fun aside, she was really very driven. And while the other children contributed to the family as much as they could, she decided to go and become a teacher. When the family moved to what was then capital of Slovak part of Czechoslovakia, which is Bratislava, it was in very early 40s. By that time, my mother was already a teacher. In 1941, my mother went to a wedding, and a very handsome, tall man, who obviously had a little bit to drink, stopped at her table and said to her, "You are so pretty, I really would like to take you out." To which my mother looked him up and down, and she said, "I'm not going out with you, you are a drunk." They were married 6 months later. My father, Tibor Löwenwein, was a journalist of a Jewish paper in Bratislava, Jüdische Allgemeine, it was called. He was totally different from my mother. While my mother was ebullient and talkative and giving and laughing, he was very serious, very analytical. I was very lucky to be able to get to their letters, which were somehow saved, and reading their letters was the biggest. First of all, I got to learn about my father. He did analysis of what was happening in Czechoslovakia, and my mother wrote, "Tibor, I love you so much, but I'm very tired." So that was before they could actually live together, because they weren't able, even though they were married. When the laws came that they had to wear the star, my father at that time was already fired from his job and was very lucky, for whatever reason, not to have to wear the star while my mother did. In 1942, the first transport started from what was then Slovak state. After the war started, the Czechoslovakia was split to Protectorate, which was the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, and which was actually governed by Germany, and Slovak state, which was a fascist state, where instead of SS, they had Garda. In 1942, just to show and refer to moral strength, my mother's older sister was taken as a single woman because that was the first transport which took all the single women, single girls. And my mother raced to the train station and tried to get her sister off the train. And when she wasn't able to, and she was threatened to be put on the train too, she was adamant, and her adamancy, for the lack of a better word, and stubbornness got her to be put in the jail. She was let go 24 hours later when my father went to get her out. But that was my mother. She was strong, sometimes stubborn, but that was her strength, as a matter of fact. By that time, she was giving private lessons because she couldn't teach. In 1942, in summer, her parents were taken. And then 2 days after my father's 30th birthday, on 28th of September 1944, there was banging on the door, and the Garda came to take them and put them on the train and transport through first concentration camp called Sereď, which was in Slovakia, and from there to Auschwitz. My mother was 2 months pregnant. When they were sitting on the floor of the wagon, they were discussing, first of all, my father was discussing his fears for my mother. And my mother, in her ebullient self, said, if we give the child a name, the God will protect it. So they decided if it's a boy, it will be Michael, or in Slovak, diminutive name was Miško, and if it is a girl, she will be Hana. And there was a woman sitting next to them. Well, they were all crammed together, so it was not that difficult to be sitting next to them on the ground. And she sidled to this couple, and with a heavy Hungarian accent, she said in Slovak, I will take care of her. She addressed it to my father. She said, Tibor, I will take care of her. She and the child will survive, and I will finally get married because it will be a mitzvah. Her name was Edith, and Edith stuck by my mother throughout. But when they got to Auschwitz, just to backtrack again, and as it was read before, my mother stood in front of Mengele, who looked at her and a very pretty German asked her whether she's pregnant. Are you pregnant, pretty woman? And she looked at him, she said, 9. He looked her up and down and moved to the next woman. You do have to understand that they were naked, standing there in front of him. There was nothing to hide. They were shaved, they were divided into left and right, and my mother, being a pretty strong woman, was moved, I believe, to the left with other women who were destined to go onto slave labor camps. And she was given this coat as a dress, and that was very lucky. So first she met Edith, who was going to take care of her, and then she got this coat, big coat, that even if she would continue to put on weight, nothing would have been seen. The last time she saw my father was about a week later, over the fence, and he said to her, Piri, think only good thoughts. and that's what she continued to do. My father stayed in Auschwitz, and later we learned that he was sent to a slave labor camp in Gliwice, in Poland also. He died in January 45 on a death march, we don't know where. My mother, together with other women, was put on a train which arrived in Freiberg, Germany. Freiberg is about 30 kilometers southwest of Dresden in Germany. It's a small town with very, very strong and deep history in mineralogy and in coal mining. And there was a factory that used to be a textile factory, and it was converted to a munition factory. It was Arado, a place that owned it. I can tell you that even though they stood by their stations, workstations, 12 to 14 hours a day, no plane flew out of that factory. So even though my mother was putting together the wings of the planes, and at the same time, because next to the camp where they were was actually a Belgian POW camp. And somehow the POWs were getting news about the progress of the war. And they started to pass little leaflets with the news to the women in Freiberg camp. And my mother, who spoke French, was able to translate the information. Sometimes she got caught and she chomped on and swallowed that piece of paper. Sometimes she got a tool thrown at her. Sometimes she got slapped around when one side of the face was slapped and the other side got hit by the door jamb, but she still lived. And at night, when Edith and her got together on the plank, Edith said to her open mouth, and I don't know how she did it, but she had a piece of bread or she had a piece of potato. So Edith continued to take care of her. In the meantime, my mother, as she was walking to work, she was thinking good thoughts, and she was looking at the little German children because she wanted to have a blue-eyed, blonde child. She was certain she's going to have the child. About a week, and she was also certain about the date of delivery. Don't ask me how, she knew it. That was my mother. It was all planned and it was going to happen. And about a week before the date that she designated as my birth date, she somehow one of the women noticed the bump and started to scream and make noise, and the guards came because the commotion. Now this is now April 1945. The Russian front is coming from east. The US front is coming from west. The mood in the camp is changing. And when all the screaming was going on, the guards arrived and asked what's going on. And said, she's pregnant. Is that true? They asked my mother. Mother said, yes, it's true. What do you need? And mother said, hot water for my feet. I'm standing 12 and 14 hours a day. I so would like a hot water for my feet. And they brought it for her. And 2 days later, I was born. On a plank in a factory. They were taking bets if it's a boy or a girl. It's a boy, the war will continue. If it's a girl, the war will end. It was a girl. 36 hours later, the camp was getting ready to evacuate for the reasons I mentioned earlier. My mother, together with other 30 women who were very sick, was put in a truck to be killed in a truck by gas. They didn't even have time to do that, so they brought them back to the train station, which already stood prepared in a cold wagons filled with 100 women per wagon. There was about 980 women to be evacuated. And these 30 women got their own car. So mother said the one good thing came out of it, that there were only 30 of them in that truck. She had me in her dress, and we went on. We were supposed to go first to Dachau, then to Buchenwald. It took us 17 days to get to the final camp, which was still open for business. The business being to kill the Jews, or kill anybody who did not fit the Nazi propaganda. They arrived on the 29th of April, and the gas was gone. All the gas was gone. So while they were brought to the gas chambers, they were not gassed. So they were taken to the barracks. My mother especially, she was taken with other women to the barracks. What I didn't mention, which Wendy did, that there were 2 other children born, who are my sister and brother of the heart. It was Mark, who was born on the train, and he was given a birthday the 20th of April because it was Hitler's birthday. So the German guard recommended that it's a good day to have. And the third one, the youngest one, was born as we arrived at Mauthausen. That's when her mom gave birth. The 2 other mothers were taken to the hospital, or whatever it was, if it qualified. And my mother was sent down to a barrack, which was free, because the gypsies who were there a few days before were the ones who were gassed with the last of the available gas. And so I don't know what happened between the 29th of April and 5th of May, because my mother never talked about it. She actually never talked much about anything pertaining to this period. But then came 5th of May, and my mother heard music, and she saw white jeeps, and she saw white stars, and she heard them roll out the barrels. And about an hour later, a young man comes by. He couldn't have been more than 20. And he had a helmet with Red Cross. And my mother calls to him in English, "I have something to show you." And she brought me to him. And she said, "Can you have a look?" It was someone whom I adopted as my father. It was Leroy Peterson, whose family is right here. They surprised me. They are my family. I have 2 birthdays, I tell everybody. And it's to my advantage. So one is the 12th of April, but the other one, the real one, is 5th of May. Because if it wouldn't have been for Pete, or as I called him, Daddy Pete, I would not be standing here. Daddy Pete got me the doctor to take care of me, got the penicillin, he kept me alive. And even though the team of the doctors had asked my mother to come to the United States because the post-war Europe was so unstable. And so was she and I. And my mother decided no, she's going home. She was going to wait for her husband. And so on 14th of May, I got birth certificate executed in Mauthausen, where it's described that I was born on transport and that the home of my father and mother is unknown, appropriately so. And on the 19th of May, we were put on the first boat that was sailing down Danube. And it followed the boat which was actually trying to find all the mines that were still there that the Germans left. We arrived in Bratislava. The house where my mother lived got bombarded, and my mother found my late father's diaries and also those letters that I mentioned earlier. She was also very lucky to have a wonderful friend with whom she remains friends until they both passed away, and who later moved to Canada. But that friend arranged that some of the things dear to my mother from her parents were saved at Sweden Embassy. So that way I was able to get some things from my grandparents. And in Bratislava, when my mother found a place to live and when the rest of the family that was still alive came back from the mountains where they were hiding, she decided that as a widow she has to get bigger bread on the table. She's the only one, because she never wanted to remarry and didn't. She studied languages and got her master's in languages. She became a teacher, beloved teacher. She loved her students. She was loved by them back. And I grew. That's basically what it was. She instilled in me, above all, not in so many words, a duty to give back. To give back, because majority, the big part of my family did not come back. And there are some big shoes that I needed to fill. And so I did my best. I did my best that I could. And I admire the young people in front of me whose essays I have read, and how important it is that we stand up for justice every day. And it's the little things. I'm not talking about big things, but it's the little things about how we behave, how we treat our neighbor, how we treat somebody who stands in the line in front of us in the store, so we are not impatient. It's just that everyday life. And I saw it in my mother as well. She loved life. She loved music. She had a beautiful voice, and she never complained. That was maybe about me, but she never complained. And that was really what I learned from her. I went to Israel, as was said, in '68, because tanks and shooting and me just don't go together. I experienced shooting in Israel too during the Yom Kippur War, but it was somehow different. I didn't feel invaded just like we did in Czechoslovakia. Anyway, after I finished my degree, I came to Chicago, and we decided to stay. I love this country. I love what it has to offer. And I see it changing, and it hurts me, and it probably hurts many people. And so I am so grateful to be here and to see you and know that you feel the same way. And it's something to look forward to, that we will keep it all on the up and a moral, for the moral justice. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Hana, for your inspiring and educational message. That was really amazing, and to the Peterson family being here, it's wonderful to see you too. Thank you. My name is Daniel Feiner, and I'm an ADL board member and co-chair of tonight's program. We appreciate everyone attending and for all the work that the students put in. Very inspirational. For those who wish to purchase a copy of the book Born Survivors, it will be available in the social hall after the program, and we thank Tattered Cover for providing that, and Dr. Berger Moran for graciously staying around to sign copies for you. Finally, please save the date for ADL's upcoming 2017 annual meeting, which will take place on Thursday, June 15th, 7 p.m. at Temple Sinai. This year's annual meeting is open to the public and free of charge, and will feature a very special keynote presenter, Megan Phelps Roper, a former member of the Westboro Baptist Church hate group and granddaughter of its founder. Ms. Phelps Roper will speak about her transition to the other side of the picket line, sharing how and why she left the church, as well as lessons she has learned about love and understanding. With that, thank you all very much for attending the 36th Annual Governor's Holocaust Remembrance Program. Drive safely and have a good night. Thank you.